Good evening, Zambia. Good evening, world. I don't know the best way of greeting the entire planet. But good evening, and thank you very much for joining us this evening on Today's the Chat with PilAto. And this evening, I'm joined by Dr. SISHUWA SISHUWA. Good evening, Dr. SISHUWA SISHUWA, and thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, PilAto. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. We're happy to have you this evening, and we're looking forward to a very exciting and engaging conversation. A lot of our viewers have had expressed interest and wanted to hear from you. They've been reading a lot of your articles, write-ups, and tweets. And today they had started indicating that they wanted to hear you speak. So we're very happy to have you. To kickstart the conversation, probably let's see who is Dr. SISHUWA SISHUWA. So maybe there are those that are seeing you and listening from you for the first time. Who is this Dr. SISHUWA SISHUWA?
He's a Zambian citizen. I think that is the, the foremost identity, and one that I share or have the privilege of sharing with you. I regard you as a national treasure, but I also have the privilege of sharing it with the 17 million other, 17 million plus other Zambians. So SISHUWA SISHUWA is a citizen of Zambia.
Oh, that's good. That's interesting. We're happy to belong to the same, to share the same love and identity with Dr. SISHUWA SISHUWA. Dr. SISHUWA, somebody would want to understand. Obviously, a lot of people would want to understand. What's your political affiliation? Who do you support? Do you support the UPND? Do you support the PF? Do you support the Socialist Party? Where is your political bias?
I get that question quite regularly. To answer it, more categorically, I support great ideas. I neither support nor hate any candidate or any politician or political party. I examine the work that politicians do, and based on what I find in them, I form an intellectual attitude towards them. For me, there's no consistent good or bad person. If I begin to find people as consistently good, consistently bad, then I cease to be a professional. What is important is to really assess you based on what you have done, based on what you have said. So if someone does something good today, you commend them. If they do something bad tomorrow, you bring that to their attention. I would like to think that it works, that way even in other professions. I imagine that a doctor cannot say, I hate this patient or I like this patient. They will stop attending to people that way. You have got to have an open mind and to engage people not so much based on the idea that they are permanently good or they are permanently bad, but based on their conduct. And that conduct, when it comes to human beings, tend to change over time. So I respect all politicians and what they do. And I think that what is important is to acknowledge when they do good and draw their attention to their conduct when they do bad. But I do not, support any politician. I do not support any political party. I praise good things when I find them, and I, once in a while condemn bad things when they manifest themselves.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you very much for that elaborate response. I think it is very important also to note that we are living in a society where everybody is perceived through political lenses. You can't be objective. Once you say something, they want to see it from a political view. Most of us have been branded as political players. Most of us have been branded as I don't know what else have been branded, but because of the certain views that we've expressed, because of certain ideals that we've defended. So I think your response caters to that that reality.
I should PilAto, I should add that I think that is a very sad situation. That divide, the idea that when people speak, the first question we ask is not the merit of what they said, but is which party do or politician do these views align with, and therefore we give them that identity. I think that is very unproductive. What you want to do is to engage in content-based discussion. If PilAto says something today that appears to agree with what, say, Edgar Lungu has done or said, we must not say PilAto is PFO. If tomorrow PilAto says something that appears to agree with a view expressed by Hakainde Hichilema, we shouldn't say, oh, PilAto is a cadre, the UPND is the PF cadre. That divide is very unproductive when it comes to content-based discussion. I must say that we are a society on the whole that I think is very, very intolerant. And we measure this intolerance at various levels, and even institutions. It can be family, it can be schools, it can be churches, it can be chieftaincy. At a very young age, if I give an example of, say, a 3 or 4 year old, if you have a child who is 3 or 4 years old and you are the parent, and that child, you tell something to that child, and the child says, "You have lied. You are lying." The typical response of the average, adult is to say, "You can't say that. You can't call an adult person. You can't tell another person that you have lied." And so you shut, the movement towards the development of the mind of that particular child. You shouldn't do that. What you should say is to take time to explain to that child why what you are saying is true. That way, you are enabling them to actually formulate an opinion, to understand the power of persuasion, to learn that they can actually be wrong and they can be corrected if somebody takes time to explain to them. But we hardly take that kind of approach. We would rather shut people, particularly those who share views or advanced views that we find uncomfortable. And I don't think that is correct, because we help other people see what they can't see yet by asking them questions to which they can hear their own responses, so that the fraudness of their position can echo in their own mind. I think it is wrong to make other people feel less for not having attained our level, be it of education, of awareness. What should happen is, can we have a conversation, content-based, away from these affiliations, your PF, your UPND, and therefore you should shut up because of that association? No. Can we actually assess what has been stated and demonstrate weakness in that point of view, so that even the one who holds that wrong view can learn to say, "Oh, I didn't know that." I think that's the kind of culture we should develop, rather than this, brandishing of affiliations. You are UPND, you are PF, you are this, you are that. That's very unhelpful towards developing a content-based discussion.
What danger do you think it poses if people continue to see and approach or relate with each other from political ends? If, for example, there is a situation that needs people that love their country, if something that happens to the country, and people decide to view this thing from partisan positions, what do you think is the worst that could happen to this country?
I think we kill debate. You see, we must understand that in a democracy, there will always be a plurality of views. Those who are who support the opposition should not be harassed on the basis that they support a political party that is different from the one that I support or that you support. Those who support the party in power should not be harassed because of their choices. But if we create that gulf between these two groups of people, what suffers actually is development, because ideas are not housed in certain political parties. They can be found in UPN, they can be found in New Heritage Party, they can be found in the Patriotic Front. And what is important is really to kill that gulf, that divide between us, so that at least we can be able to talk to each other. The media facilitates that, and the debate is healthy in a democracy. It is one thing if we call dissenters names or insult them, but it's another thing if we actually come into the discussion, to the table, with an open mind. to say, I'm really keen to learn, but I'm also keen to advance my opinion. Because if you don't advance your opinions, then you won't know if those opinions are right or wrong. It is by coming to the table of discussion, of debate, that you are able to test those ideas. And ultimately, we must be able to retain the understanding, shared understanding in my view, that ideas matter. Nations thrive or go backward based on ideas. Those ideas are not unique to any political formation, to any section of the population, whether it's the working class, whether it's the rural areas, the urban centers. By coming together through various platforms, we are able to actually identify these ideas and say, can we identify those that can advance our interests collectively? Because if the opposition party or the ruling party succeed, that cannot be done at our expense. They succeed because the nation is succeeding, and we all win when we have that kind of approach to public issues.
Where is the place for a Zambian that is not affiliated to any political party? Where is the place in these political conversations, in this highly politically charged society? Where is the place for a Zambian who does not belong to any of these political parties, but they hold an opinion?
Many of them, tend to hold this opinion. They tend to self-censor because they fear being branded. They would rather stay in silence for fear that if I express this view, the attitude that many people have is to look at this view not as a product of my own, mental processes and exercising that opinion or mental power, but as a product of a particular political order. So many Zambians who don't belong to these dominant parties, they have a situation, they find themselves in a situation where they feel foreign, even though they're at home, because they don't find spaces or avenues where they can share their views without the fear of being judged. We must embrace the unfamiliar. We must embrace uncomfortable conversations. Because if we don't do that, it will be very difficult to harness ideas that these Zambian who doesn't belong to any political party would have. And who knows, maybe that actually may be the key to ensuring that our progress as a nation is assured based on those ideas. It's really important, I must emphasize, that we develop a culture of talking to the other side. Let's not nurture this gulf between ourselves. We are one people. And even where we disagree, let's understand the basis of our disagreements. What is it that actually is drawing this divide between us? If you come to me and you tell me something that makes me uncomfortable, I should examine that and say, but PilAto, why are you saying this? What exactly do you mean? I shouldn't insult you because by so doing, the assumption I'm making is that what is missing in relation to what should take us forward is actually the absence of insults. And therefore, if I deliver those insults, then we're making progress. Insulting a dissenter may make you feel good and you clap yourself, but it does nothing to advance our collective interest. What advances our collective interest are ideas. And those ideas must be purified, must be discussed, they must be sourced from wherever category of the population, from whichever political party, without any form of discrimination. What is important is, do these ideas advance our collective interest? And if they do, let's implement them.
Thank you very much. 2021 elections are said to be historic. Why do you think the 2021 elections were historic? Why do you think they were very important for our country's democracy and our country's history?
Thank you for that question, PilAto. I think that the August elections were very significant, I would say, for perhaps four main reasons. you know, and those reasons are better understood by asking perhaps a sub-question to say, where was the country by the 12th of August? Because we must understand from there, where were we on 12th of August? And I think there were 4 factors that really answer that question of where we are, where we were. The first is that we had a Zambia that was characterized by extreme levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And underlining these factors, in my view, was an economy that had shrunk, that had effectively collapsed. It could no longer afford to provide jobs for the labor force. You know, we have about 7 million Zambians who in the labor force who are eligible to work. We have less than 1.7 million Zambians in formal employment. And,
Yes.
and much of the population that is affected are young people. And so when you have that kind of scenario, where you have significant, layers of the population that, can't find a job, you have a time bomb. And that's a Zambia we had in the run-up to the August election. The second factor that speaks to where we were in the run-up election was we had a Zambia where state institutions had been vandalized. And when you destroy state institutions, formal institutions that like the police, the Anti-Corruption Commission, the judiciary in terms of its independency and capacity to adjudicate conflict between different sections of the population, when you destroy institutions that way, you then have an inevitable problem of high levels of corruption because people engage in all acts of impunity. We became, in effect, Zambia became a corrupt nation, not so much a Christian nation. Corruption became a national culture, and that's not that's not the kind of Zambia that we imagined, or our forefathers imagined in 1964, or our liberators, pro-democracy liberators imagined in 1991. Certainly, it's not the country that those who won power in 2011 had promised to deliver. And then the third one was these widespread divisions, ethnic divisions fueled by political elites in power. Sections of the populations were regarded as less. Zambians, for example, Tongas in particular, were identified consistently by political elites for harassment. They were made to feel as if they were less Zambian. You also had that division finding expression in the civil service. People were retired in national interest and put in inverted commas national interest. It was really in partisan interest. So you had a country that was deeply polarized on ethnic and political lines. The fourth factor that really brings these things together was the country on the brink of civil war. You had all these manifestations of a poor performing economy, destruction of state institutions, high levels of corruption. The divisions that emerged after the first 2 factors came into play left the country as a tinderbox. So when we were going to the election, the police, for example, had lost its capacity to be a trusted entity to secure public peace, to be seen as a defender of public interest. It became more of a private militia for serving the interests of those in power and their supporters. So when you had the incumbents deploying soldiers, now on top of that, to say, can you go and now police electoral contest, something that has never happened in the history of Zambia before. You have to understand that you have a partisan police that is armed to the teeth. Then you send soldiers to the streets. These are people who have no history of dealing with a civilian electoral contest, for example. On that kind of a situation, that was very dangerous. But it showed you the kind of society we were, and in a way, it speaks to why the elections in 2011, in 2021 were very significant. And it the outcome could only produce an extreme result because of we had a society that was deeply divided at extreme levels between the haves and the have-not, between this political grouping and the other, but also one where the security forces were then unleashed on that accumulated heap of grievances. And that is the country that we had. So the elections were significant in answering the question, can we take a break from this? Can we go back to the Zambia that had a respectable culture that promoted the rights of citizens, that had that democratic tradition that made us the envy of Africa? Can we create a Zambia? Can we vote for a Zambia where the economy at least will be rebuilt in a way that works for everybody? Can we vote for a Zambia where national unity is enhanced, where nobody is made to feel less because they are Tonga or they are from Western Province or Northwestern? Can we vote for a Zambia where institutions actually work, whether it's the judiciary, whether it's the commission, whether it's the police, they work to advance public interest? And the elections were significant in that sense because they afforded us an opportunity to continue with the status quo or to take a new path. So when I hear the new government, for example, saying our government is the new dawn, it's easy to dismiss that as a mere sloganeering, but actually the country needed a rebirth of some kind to say, could we actually have a new start? And the election produced the outcome that I think affords us an opportunity to take a new direction.
Beyond the slogan "New Dawn," is it a new dawn indeed for this country?
Well, it has been 5 months. The European League have been in power for 5 months now. Anybody who expected them to deliver, their key promises within that period, I think would have expected too much. It's a bit unrealistic. But what we would expect is, are we seeing foundations for a kind of Zambia that we imagined prior to 2021 elections? And the best way of doing that is really to understand this point that we should manage our expectations of what the government can do. Partly, there's this idea that value fixes, that slogan. It was fueled in part by Hichilema himself. But I don't think that the collapse or the crises that we face can be the solution to those crises lie in one head, or they can be solved by one person. Partly because of our the Christian character of our country, where you had a singular divine power in the name of Jesus. We have tended to look at politicians as similar to our Heavenly Father, to say they are here to solve our problems, we should sit back. No. Rebuilding the country would require the support of everyone, wherever they are. Professionals, should do what they have to do. Institutions cannot rebuild themselves. Institutions will have to create new cultures. And the politicians or those in power must also be able to say, how do we actually build national unity? So there are signs of progress that you can actually point at to say, well, the vote was not in vain. There are also worrying signs that you hope that those in power will take note. If you look at the state of the economy, are you seeing signs of progress there? Yes, they have presented a very, very good budget if it were implemented, can actually take us a step further towards our desired goal. The decision to reach an agreement with the International Monetary Fund, in my view, was important. I've seen a lot of criticism to say the IMF is very bad. We shouldn't have taken that route because they bring with them very harsh conditions which hit the poor particularly hard. That's very true. But the question we should ask is, what alternative existed that, say, Hichilema would have taken outside that deal that would have enabled us to, say, secure money from capital markets at very zero interest rates, renegotiate in terms of repaying our debts with our creditors, but also allow us to have some kind of fiscal discipline that would be worse than what we would get from the IMF. In my view, heading into the elections, the choice was not whether to get an IMF deal or not. It was who between the two leading candidates, that is Ichilema on the one hand and Lungu on the other, was better placed to implement the IMF deal. The PF consistently committed themselves to the implementation of the IMF to say, oh, we are going to get the IMF as well. I've seen now an attempt to rewrite history to say, no, in fact, we didn't want the IMF to because we care for Zambians. The economy was destroyed or collapsed to such a level that they made the coming of the IMF almost inevitable. And what the Ichilema administration has done is to simply say we cannot, make money available for social services without dealing with the debt issue. Unless China, for example, forgives all our debt, or the private creditors forgo all our debt, that won't happen. What you need to do sometimes is to bring the IMF on board, but that really gives you some kind of leverage in negotiating with the creditors. So it is something commendable that they have brought the IMF on board. How you manage the effect of bringing the IMF on board is something else. That requires communication to actually let the people know, say, oh, these are the conditions of the IMF deal. And I've seen people raising that. And it's important that the government should respond, should be more transparent and respond to citizens, say, oh, this is what the IMF deal is in relation to conditions. So I think you see very good direction on the economy. This year, 2022, I think will be very crucial because we have seen the government saying they will employ about 40,000 plus workers in the health and education sector. That's commendable if it's done. But that is just a drop in the ocean because you need professionals also, lawyers, artisans, engineers, you name them, in different sectors. We have not talked about when these people will be employed or how they will be employed. So the government should be able to tell us to say, this is what we are doing, these are the programs we are doing. What we should be able to see is an actualization of their manifesto. This is what we have done this manifesto idea into a policy, and this is what we are doing to implement it. But you see some direction there. On the question of democracy, again, you see very encouraging signs. People are able to speak freely. Media, institutions are operating freely. I'm happy Prime TV, for example, is back on online now, and the newspapers and radio stations, no one is harassing them for broadcasting whatever content. The rights of people, I think, citizens that were threatened or were eroded under the previous administration are widely respected. That is not to say there are no worrying signs. They are there. I've seen, for example, today that Rafael Nakachinda has been arrested for defamation of the president. You see, that is worrying, not because I agree with what he said, but because that law should be repealed. And the UPND, in fact, committed themselves to repealing some of this legislation that undermine free speech. You shouldn't arrest him for simply, for insulting me. You must be able to give him that chance if that's a best that his mind can master in terms of contributions. We must be able to tolerate people to develop thick skin. People whose only capacity to reason is never beyond an ad hominem attack. We should bear sympathy for those kind of people. Repeal that law, or if you are the president and people are arresting, the police are arresting people in your name, you should be able to say, not in my name. Let citizens be free to express themselves. But you can also instruct an MP from your party. Can you actually set the process that will lead to amendment of this law, or you can just repeal the law totally. You shouldn't give people that kind of attention. If you listen to the content of his speech, like Nakachinda is saying, there's very little there to actually take on. So why do you want to give him attention by actually making him a political matter of some kind? What they are doing on the anti-corruption fight also is commendable, but that has to be structured as well. There has to be a clear strategy on how you fight corruption, because one of the reasons why Zambians voted for this political party is because they wanted to see action on the political on the corruption front. And if you look at the arrests that have been done so far, they are mainly to do with political offences. I've seen the movement towards the arresting people for questionable work. They called Lusambo, I think, to the Anti-Corruption Commission the other day. That's commendable. Let people come to this institution. Let them account for the wealth that they have acquired and explain, this is how I acquired my wealth. If you acquired legitimately, I'm sure that will be established. And what the government has started doing, in addressing the corruption of the last 7 years is important. But they should also deal with the corruption that is happening in the current government. I've seen opposition parties raising criticism around this issue of fertilizer. I don't know how legitimate that criticism is to say, fertilizer is being delivered not on time, not in the right quantity, and at exorbitant price. But it's also being single source. If that's true, we don't know. What is important is to come out and clarify that. The Minister of Information with the government spokesperson may be conflicted given that some of the people who are being mentioned are committed, are close to her. But we need the government to actually show that they are committed fighting corruption in the current administration. Are they out fighting the corruption of the Lungu administration? We shouldn't wait until they're out of power to actually see the movement towards fighting corruption within the current government. But what we are seeing, I think, is very, very important to start with. We are seeing that direction. We have seen the Chief Justice announcing recently that there will be a specialized entity to deal with financial and economic crimes. That's very important. And I hope that the government would also provide the judiciary with significant resources and the necessary political will to actually make that process a success. One of the ways in which the previous administration destroyed institutions was through underfunding them, consistently. They can't function if you actually don't give them money. They need to operate effectively. But it was also by appointing unqualified people, some incompetent, to run these institutions. So you need to understand, why did the economy fail? It failed because the institutions had to collapse. But why did the institutions collapse? They collapsed because they were not funded adequately. They collapsed because we are appointing incompetent people to institutions. Can the current government make sure that they do something different? So overall, what you are seeing is something promising, PilAto. And we will be able to know, at the end of this year, perhaps next year, and be able to judge the current administration fairly. But what is important is to make sure that we don't wait until it's 2025 or 2026 to actually raise criticism. If you are going to Kago with me on a bus and you are driving very dangerously, when we are leaving, say, this place, Lusaka, and outskirts of Lusaka, and I notice that they are actually driving dangerously, I shouldn't wait until we reach Kago to say, but the way you were driving was very dangerous. I was scared that we may not reach. No, I should be able to say, can you please drive safe? What is important is for us to arrive. Because if I don't let you know at the very start of the trip, we may not even reach Kago. We may collapse. So those who are criticizing the current administration, for example, should not be regarded as enemies, people who don't mean well. They belong to the opposition. They are bitter, whatever descriptions you want to lay at their feet. Engage with what they are saying and help them understand if you think what you are doing is correct. And similarly, those who are defending the current government, I've seen sometimes we are very critical of those who were in civil society to say, now these people, they're supporting the UPND. They are not. They're actually paying attention to ideas. If PilAto says that's a commendable idea that HH has done or this minister has done, it doesn't mean that PilAto is now UPND or that he's now PA. We must be able to actually understand that we all want the same thing, successful Zambia, because it is only through that we will be able to actualize our aspirations.
Thank you very much. That was a clearly communicated idea, and obviously it also brings us to the fears and the concerns that we had raised in the earlier question on is there room for somebody that does not belong to any political party? Doctor, I would like to understand from your perspective, where is the opposition in Zambia today? Do we have a credible opposition force? Do we have somebody we can claim to say this is the opposition voice to provide credible checks and balances to the government today?
Thank you, PilAto. There are two ways of looking at that question. The first is to look at the outcome of the elections. One of the things you realize came from the August election is a scenario where you only have two parties in parliament. So the PF won about 60 seats or so, thereabout, in the National Assembly. The UPND obviously won 80 plus seats. And what that has done is to leave us into an uncharted territory, where you basically have two parties. So the part that should ordinarily provide checks and balances is the one that was in power before, and whose credibility is in tatters because it has been delegitimized by the scale of defeat, but also by their conduct when they were in power. So much of what the PF say, even when it's progressive, people are very dismissive of those ideas. To say, well, you had your time in power, we can't listen to you. And therefore, the loser is our democracy. The loser is the country, because we must be able to assess ideas based on their merit, not the partisan regalia that they are wearing. But that is the consequence of the outcome of the election. The idea that the party that is providing checks and balances, at least in the National Assembly, in Parliament, is the one that led Zambia into the near dysfunctional country that we almost became before 12 August. But we must not discount the capacity of the PF and their leadership to actually change. They are not immune, the PF and their leaders, to changing and maybe to using those experiences, their experiences, for the better. Our politicians tend to discover their principles once they lose power. If you listen to Given Ruminda talking now, you not actually accept that this is a man whose arrogance before the 2021 election was extremely annoying and stinking in relation to the limit to which he went to actually make citizens feel they had no say in governance processes. If you listen to people crying foul now about some of the actions of the UPND, you don't actually think these were the people who were the oppressors yesterday. But what is important is to really grow above that kind of feeling of injustice, to say the PF were very wrong in how they treated us, and therefore should not listen to anything they say. We must accept that the PF is the opposition that we have now. And the checks and balances that are providing the UPND are extremely important in getting the UPND government to work. And we must be able to also open our minds to some of the ideas they are saying, to say, is it actually possible that they can actually change these people? We should not also discount the possibility that if the UPND fail to honor their promises, or they fail to communicate properly in terms of what they are doing, which is one of their weaknesses, they haven't developed a clear communication strategy. That creates a room for the resurrection of the PF, the very party that almost collapsed the country, to actually emerge, because all the people who hear in terms of critical voices is the leadership of the PF. Why? Because civil society has gone to sleep, because PilAto is not talking, SISHUWA is quiet. So the PF assume that, default position to provide the leadership, to speak for people. And people, if their aspirations are not met, they begin to look at the PF and say, well, maybe they have actually changed, based on their conduct, of course. So we are in that position where the opposition that we have is delegitimized, in the eyes of many people. As far as Zambians are concerned, the PF should even, some of the things I hear from people is to say, this is a criminal organization, it should be banned, it should not exist. That's anti-democratic behavior. What we should be able to do is to assess the PF. Are they changing? Are they saying this because they just want to criticize the government? Are they actually identifying with the government on issues that advance public interest or not. And then you have to understand that the PF have not sorted out the leadership question. You have Munduvila, I think, Ruvinda, Emmanuel Mwamba, and Gambulia, some of the leaders that I've heard want to lead the party front. Is that what the PF think, they need to actually redeem themselves? That's for the PF members to decide. As Zambians, we can come to a different conclusion. Say maybe if you look at these leaders, perhaps they're actually seeking to become the leaders of the PF, so that if the government takes them to court for corruption or whatever they did when they were in power, they can use that platform to say, oh, I'm being harassed. So perhaps they're actually using the leadership issue to prepare for that potential, those potential corruption charges against them before they emerge. We don't know. But what, as non-PF members, what would be interested to know is, A, what are you doing to actually hold the government to account in an effective way, in a way that shows that you're not just there to oppose the government because you want to empower, but in a way that's actually constructive. Then you have the other opposition parties away from the PF, those that got 2% in the last election. There are about 14, I think, of them. Again, what I have not seen from these opposition parties is really the occupation of that space which the PF, which the UPND left to excite voters, to actually be able to constructively engage the government to say, you committed yourself to protecting our civil rights. We are going to the streets to protest against the increment in fuel price because you promised to deliver the opposite. Now you are delivering the opposite. We are going to the streets. You test the government's commitment to the right of, say, public assembly. It's easy for politicians to say we are very committed to these rights, but test them. Free speech, we talk about Nakachimba. You cannot assess the government's commitment to free speech if you don't talk. Don't ask PilAto to say, speak for me. No, speak. If it means the best that you can do is insult your leaders, do it. Because even that is important in communicating a message to your president or to your leadership to say how you feel, the totality of your reality, such that you can only insult. Okay? Other leaders should not be offended by that. If you look at Donald Trump's Twitter page, how Americans insulted him, if you brought that to Zambia, there will be so many people, being arrested by the police. Leaders should drop thick skin. The opposition should be able to hold the government to account. Of course, ideally through constructive engagement, through civil language, and I'm not seeing that, happening. There are pockets of it here and there, but the 14 opposition parties, smaller opposition parties, have not done enough to really convince Zambians that beyond the PF, for example, we are the party of choice that you should listen to, in relation to their capacity to find their voice on critical issues that are happening, but also in relation to testing the resolve of the party in power to upholding our fundamental human rights. I hope that changes. Of course, it's too early, just 5 months. I hope that over the next 1 year, 4 years, we will be able to see an opposition that is able to be effective, to engage the government. We really need a strong opposition because without that, the UPND can do whatever they want. And we don't want that. We want civil society to be strong and to continue holding the government to account as they did with them.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So what I'm going to do is I'll go read comments and questions from our viewers. But also I have a special appearance from a friend of mine, Anthony Nyese, who wants to ask you a question online, but obviously I'll let them come through once we've gotten questions and comments from our viewers online. So let me see if I can pick 1, 2, 3, 4 questions and comments from our viewers. Okay, so this one is Loveness Chimba. Loveness Chimba says, PilAto and our guest, we need to also talk about decentralization, because we are taking it as corruption to see people being imported for the work that locals can do. This one is Edward Milimo. Edward Milimo says, I do not agree with you where you're saying you should ignore those insulting the president. What about your children start insulting? Would you just keep quiet? So maybe you can respond to those two, and then we can move to the next set of questions.
The first question from Chimba was about this idea of
Decentralization.
Jobs that locals can do. Why do you have to import people from Lusaka to go to those places and do those jobs? I think what is important is two things. First, if those jobs are advertised and the recruitment is transparent, and formal, then it makes sense that everybody should have a chance. Nobody should say because I'm in Lusaka, those from say Wapula cannot apply for this job. We are all Zambians. We should be able to get jobs in any part of the country. But if you are talking about jobs that can be done by people at the local level, there's no need to hire people, to get people from Lusaka and go and do those jobs. So in that case, I think she has a very, very valid point to say, can we make sure that for jobs that can be done at the local level by the people there, they are actually given those opportunities? You had a lot of talk about this idea of the increased CTF.
Yes.
People are saying that's decentralization. People are taking money. We are taking money from Lusaka to rural areas. As far as I've known the history of CTF, it has always gone to those places. So there's nothing new there. What is important is to acknowledge that yes, it has been increased, but it's not correct to say we are taking money from people in Lusaka to go to those places. Where was CTF going before? It was going to these same places. What has changed is that now it has been increased from 1.6 million to about 25, and that is commendable. But what we need to do is to put in place structures to manage that money. I would prefer the situation where actually that money goes to the districts, because they already have the infrastructure in terms of how to identify areas of need, the support system that they need to implement key ideas rather than constituencies. But I'm sure this is some of the things that they will have to think about. Say, how do we create structures so that this money is not simply does not simply become the empowerment scheme that we saw under the last days of the last administration. If you actually ask anyone, say that money which was given to youths or whatever group of people, where did it go? What was its impact? Can you actually have an assessment of how that money was utilized? Nobody will come forth, because it was almost like just throwing money at people. You don't want that. There must be structural ways in which you actually say, we want to make sure that this money that we have increased to go to rural areas is utilized in a structured way, in an organized way, and it can be accounted for. That is something that local people, of course, are better placed to deal with. And Chimba's point is important in that regard, because the local people know what is their priorities, but there has to be structures in which these things takes place. The question about insults, again, we must, as a society, we must learn to understand that if PilAto, if I'm capable of having a conversation with you at a logical level, it doesn't mean that everybody can come to me and have that conversation with me at a logical level. There are people who genuinely don't understand, but there are others who are also angry, because for one reason or the other, they're to type of their reality that it can only leave them angry. They can insult you or me or anybody. The question we should ask ourselves is, does that insult change who you are? What is the impact of that insult on PilAto if I insulted you today? It doesn't. In fact, it reflects badly on me who's wishing the insult than on you with experience, because you can simply ignore me. Politicians, particularly those in power, must develop thick skin. You cannot be so sensitive to criticism where somebody calls you names. You say, go and arrest this person. And the police sometimes actually, they act in the belief that this is what the president wants us to do. This behavior, psychopathic behavior, even among professionals. If I do this to please the power that be, even when the president hasn't told them, go and arrest that person, for insulting me, they go and do it because they think that's what politicians the politicians in power want to see. That is why it is important, in my view, to develop a culture of tolerance, especially when you are in political leadership. It's a democracy. People will say things that sometimes make you uncomfortable. It doesn't mean that you should arrest them. If the children insult you, you should sit them down and understand what exactly their grievance is. Okay, they insult you, say, okay, thank you so much. Now, what is the problem? Seek to understand people's concerns. Don't just shut them up or declare conclusions. Say, you should never speak, or you have insulted me and therefore should be arrested. You wouldn't have learned actually what concerns or grievances they have. So let's develop a tolerant society. I'm not advocating for a nation of insulters, if it is such a term. We should try as much as possible, I have said, to have content-based discussion. But those among us who are not able to, have that logical conversation, we shouldn't shut them. We should sometimes people. There are people who are organically intelligent, like yourself, PilAto, very smart and somebody I admire. But there are also people who are not that gifted. Those people should not be kept away from discussion on the basis that they cannot express their ideas in a logical way. If the insults is what they are capable of unleashing, let's give them that opportunity, let them insult, and then afterwards ask them, what concerns do you have? Sometimes it's just an outlet. They're just so angry. Maybe they're disappointed that the fuel price has increased. Maybe they haven't found a job. Maybe they are not, it's one thing or the other. We must understand the totality of their circumstances. To simply shut them up on the basis that they have not reached our level of awareness, of understanding, of logical expression, is to really encourage some kind of self-censorship. And so I disagree with this idea that we should arrest people for insulting. If people insult you as a president or me as a public person, let them go ahead, and I'm not going to stop them, say, please stop insulting me. No. Encourage them. Afterwards, ask them, what are the key concerns? Why is Nakachinda using this kind of language? What exactly the problem? Have that conversation. You can demonstrate the weakness in Nakachinda's point of view by profiling a superior point of view. And people will be able to say, oh, he's just politicking, or he's just, being unruly, or just wants to draw attention to, issues that actually don't matter. If you arrest him, even for just, I've read some stories, if it's true that he was arrested for using a Bemba adage, you are actually giving him recognition and undue attention. No, we should respect people as our models, not because they have, said that we should insult that then make them our leader. No, people should be able to come to us and convince us that there's a merit in this idea, and we should listen to those ideas. If there are weaknesses in them, we should edge our opinions. It is wrong to insult people, to arrest people just because they have insulted you or they have said something that you don't like. The president, and I urge President Hichilema here, he should stop this culture of the police arresting people in the name of defamation of the president. That law should be repealed. Anyone who is arrested under that law, if we agree that the law is bad, is a victim of that particular law, regardless of whatever we think about it. I may be uncomfortable and dislike what Nakachinda is saying, but let him have the right to say it. It's part of our liberty. Let people express themselves. It's a democracy. You can't afford to shut people up just because they're saying things that I'm most uncomfortable with. And for leaders, my appeal to the president and the ministers, various leaders in public offices, to say, please do not thick skin. If somebody insults you and you think there's nothing there in terms of substance, ignore them. What do you lose by ignoring them? If there's an issue, and sometimes it's a bit malicious, it's untrue, it's false, explain, come out and say that is incorrect for A, B, C, D. Don't shut people up. Don't say, don't speak, you belong to the PF. That's wrong.
Let me add some more, because I think we're running out of time. I have Nanyense there coming later. So Nelson Sakala says, Dr. SISHUWA says there was no other alternative that the UPND government would have taken in relation to the IMF. Did you take time to listen to Dr. Griff Chelwa's views on this regarding those alternatives? The other one is Chileshe Chanda. Does the current drive for devolution and decentralization promote regionalism? Let me get the third one so then we can respond to as many questions as possible as you respond to this. Which one? Okay, so maybe you can respond to that. We can respond to these two, and then we can pick the last set. Anton Nyense is joining us later. Mr. Nyense, just a second. I don't know, just a little bit. Let me exhaust responses from Dr. SISHUWA, and then I'll give you an opportunity to ask him and contribute live online. Thank you, Doctor. You can continue.
I listened to Dr. Griff Chelwa's discussion that you had with him last time that he was on this platform.
Yes.
If I understood him correctly, he wasn't particularly outright in saying we didn't need the IMF. You know, Dr. Chelwa's problem was the process that led us to the IMF. Say you should have consulted. But the more I listened to him, the more I felt there was this inherent assumption that the government did consult. Who was to be consulted? Was there supposed to be a national interview of some kind? I would imagine that the current government did consult. It may be that they didn't consult Dr. Chelwa, but he's one of our brilliant minds. That it would have been very helpful to get his views on the matter, given that he's one of our finest economists. But what I didn't get from that idea was a compelling alternative that was provided to say this was a clear alternative that existed that the government could have taken. There was a direction in there was a sense that alternative existed, but critics have not actually provided that compelling, a narrative. We must. I go back to this point that the previous cabinet, the Lungu administration, that is, they sacrificed the economic rationality for political expedience, and consequently made the new administration inherit PilAto a poisoned chalice, so to say. After carelessly contracting a huge and unsustainable debt, that effectively collapsed Zambia's economy. What you saw was the PF opportunistically delaying committing to an IMF program. To say, oh, we are going to have this election. If we commit to an IMF program, we might lose the election. Okay, there was that fear on their part, so they were not necessarily opposed to the IMF deal itself. No, they were not. They felt that is something to be done after the elections. And we must understand what it is that the IMF, in my view, brings in the totality of our circumstances. So why was going to the IMF, for example, very, very helpful? And I think that the key issue for me is that apart from helping the country to reschedule, the debt payments with creditors, to attract foreign direct investment, and reassure rating agencies, which is good for accessing money from capital markets. An IMF program, PilAto, would have also unlocked other donor funding, targeting social spending. It would have offered the close to zero interest rates, in my view, on loans in comparison to the market rates, and it would even have guaranteed some kind of good fiscal management. Because what we are acknowledging in essence when we bring the IMF is that we lack the discipline to basically do these things on ourselves. So we need some kind of external disciplinary force to rein over our expenditure. But by adopting populist policies such as we saw in terms of empowerment programs or schemes and doing everything possible to avoid reaching an agreement with the IMF up until after the election, the Lungu administration pushed Zambia into more debt. They worsened the economic situation and left it for the next administration to clean its mess. This thing of saying the IMF is bad, should be accompanied with a clear and compelling alternative solution. To say, in the absence of a complete debt write-off, what options existed? If we are to criticize each of us decision in terms of the IMF for support, we must accompany that criticism with a very compelling idea of the alternative that existed. Because critics have rightly noted the conditions are harsh and they will hit the poor especially hard. What is less emphasized, PilAto, is the fact that the new president had little choice given the perilous state of the economy, and that the situation will simply get much worse if the country failed to deal with its staggering debt issues. In other words, if the budgetary process is to be put on a sound basis, strict spending controls are essential. And that's why I said earlier, PilAto, to say whoever won the election, in my view, would have taken the IMF route. It wasn't a question of that would the PF go in a separate way. No, the issue was who between the two was better placed to implement an IMF program, an administration led by Hichilema or one led by Lungu. The IMF had dealt with Lungu since 2016 or even earlier, so they knew him, including his delayed taxes just to make sure that we passed the election cycle. Hichilema had more leeway because he was new, but also I think it's easy to trust him because he committed himself that, and you begin to say, can we give this person a chance? And even the creditors, I imagine, are much more receptive. I'm not saying the IMF is the panacea to our solution. I'm actually very much against the International Monetary Fund at a personal level. But pragmatically, I have to recognize that the state of the economy was so bad that whoever won between those two candidates would have had no option but to go to the IMF. And I think that's what Hichilema did. Anyone who disagrees with that, I think we should welcome the discussion, but we should all ask them, can you actually provide a compelling alternative that exists in the absence of complete debt write-off from China and other countries?
Thank you very much, Doctor. I was almost bringing Mr. Nyense here, but he's gone out. Let's see if we can get one more comment as we wait for him. So, Engineer Willing Did Sichalo says, until this law is repealed, insulting the president is an offense, and for people masquerading to be leader, we expect a little more from them instead of acting like low-life thugs. It seems like a lot of people have reacted more to your thoughts on defamation of the president. This is coming from Mr. Melvin Mampi Muswe, who says, PilAto, I agree that leaders should develop thick skin to public comments, but we also want an orderly society. People in public offices are husbands, fathers, brothers, uncles, and therefore they are also sisters, they are also mothers, they are also aunties, and therefore having more respect for one another is important. We can't have people unleashing insults publicly and classify such craziness as being democratic. No, I disagree. Let me get another one. I don't think you have enough time to respond to all of them, but I want to cover as many contributions as possible. This one is coming from Peter Mtale. Peter Mtale says, I remember one politician at a political rally used a certain idiom to explain something in Copperbelt to mean something, and people condemned him, but he defended the statement saying, even in our language, we use these words to explain something. Mr. Sata was called Chumbu Munsholwa and Munshebwa in political field. I'm not saying we should insult, but rather let's try to understand from which context one has used a certain word. Mr. Anthony Nyense is here. Let me bring Mr. Nyense to ask his question and make his contribution. Then you can respond to some of these. Mr. Anthony Nyense, how are you, sir?
Very well, Mr. PilAto. My pleasure to be here. Good evening.
Evening. So we have a minute or so. You may make your contribution or question.
I am very well. How are you, Mr. PilAto?
I'm perfect. I'm perfect. I'm saying we have a minute to spare, so you can make your question.
Okay. Well, thank you to be here, Mr. PilAto.
Sorry, I think we lost you, Mr. Nyese.
Okay, so my contribution is very simple and very small. What I want to rather, my concern is on the SEC. Firstly, we want to see SEC extend the investigations to the companies, be it public or private institutions, from individuals. And they should not only target politicians, they should as well follow the business individuals and companies, including companies that are on the copper belt. I want a view that corruption is not
Mr. Nyense's internet seems to be very bad. Okay, comrades, I think we'll let him come in. I think we don't have so much time. Let me just read as a few more, because I know we've run out of time. So this is Kasali Matipa. Kasali Matipa says, Dr. SISHUWA is correct. Arresting people for insulting is undemocratic and counterproductive. You seem to have an ally there. This one is coming from Dr. Mushavati Mukambata. Mr. Mushavati says, great discussion, Doc and PilAto. Dr. SISHUWA taught me history in my final year at UNZA. Very objective. However, Doc, we should also agree that insulting language has also potential of annoying others, leaders inclusive. The thick skin you are talking about is well understood, but there is limits to which one can go. I do agree with you, though, that some of these guys are attention seekers. We need balance. Let me get the last comment. I think we've really gone out of time. Which one? Can I see something from a lady? Can I see something from a lady, please? Ladies, okay, since I can't find the question, I'm going to find this one. So this is Susan Nandu says, following from Kabwe. Okay, so can I let Mr. Nyense to finish his contribution? I think I like his, then we can conclude. Mr. Nyense, please, can you make your contribution quickly? We want to wind up, we've run out of time. Okay. Dr. SISHUWA, can you respond to one or two of these and then make your concluding remarks? I think we've run out of time.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize the point that yes, there is a law on defamation of the president at the moment. It's an unjust law, and I hope that the government can repeal that law. They made that commitment, but even in the absence of one, I think that it should have no space in a democracy. Let citizens criticize their leaders. You know, the democracy is built on participation, and we should really take away any institutional mechanisms or laws that undermine the expression of of what citizens think. I agree that we shouldn't insult, we should develop a culture of civility in public discussion, in public discourse. That's ideal. But those who are less than we are in terms of capacity to actually have a logical discussion should not be shut out on the basis that I yet to develop that. We should be able to actually hear, even when they're just angry or just expressing feelings of anger, we must be able to understand what has led them to that. What is it that they're trying to communicate to us? I remain opposed to arresting any individual on the basis that they have insulted me or the president or anybody. What we have as citizens, as voters, is a weapon that we can use to say, oh, I don't like somebody who insults. I'm not going to vote for that leader at the next election because I want somebody who is actually able to engage in a rational conversation, in a civilized discussion with another person, so that at least I'm able, as a voter, to make an informed decision arising from that conversation that is devoid of insults. You can punish people that way. Don't send them to, don't arrest them. The police should stop that kind of conduct. We saw it under the PF, and we don't want it now. And I think that it's a stain on Hichilema's presidency that people are being arrested in the name of defamation of the president. That is a law that should be repealed. The earlier he does that, the better. Or at least you should make it very clear to the police the way he made it clear in terms of giving bail to people, suspects, to say, I don't want anyone to be arrested in my name. The other thing that I would hope the new government can do is really to entrench this culture of giving, of making sure that the people are granted bail, they're arrested and released in time. I was very unhappy when we saw, I think Kampiongo was arrested in Lusaka and then driven to Shwangandu. Davis Chama was arrested in Lusaka, kept in detention several days. The charge changed along the way, taken to Livingstone and then to Sesheke. You see, there's a cost there. You are taking this person to Shwangandu, you are taking this person to Livingstone and Sesheke using taxpayers' money. Just summon them. Just tell him, report to Sesheke on this such and such a date. You will find his way there. He uses money. I'm not saying that you shouldn't arrest people who have committed offenses, however distant that might be. You should do that because you are teaching even the current leaders to say, if you commit an offense, then no matter how long it takes, the long arm of the law will eventually catch up with you. But you should also extend that kind of vigilance to what's happening in your own government. Don't focus so much on distant crimes that you forget the crimes that are happening in the current administration. So I really appeal to Zambians to say, can we be more tolerant? Can we live with those among us who are not able to be as respectful in debate, as civilized? We can ignore them. There's nothing that will happen to us if we actually ignore them. And for our leaders in public office, please don't arrest people for insulting you. If somebody comes and say, I want to insult you, tell them, go ahead, I'll take the insults. I wanted to conclude by saying that, you see, people vote for changes, material changes in their lives. They want to see, they want jobs. Democracy is meaningless if it doesn't guarantee citizens jobs, if it doesn't guarantee housing, better housing, if it doesn't guarantee access to water, if it doesn't guarantee the very aspiration that they wanted to see in their lives, to be actualized in their lives ahead of this election. Much of the condition that could have led to civil war, if those factors that I mentioned earlier remain in place, extreme levels of inequality, extreme levels of unemployment, especially among young people, the institutions, we have not done much in terms of changing the culture of institutions. I've seen what the behavior of the police, for example. So the country remains a tinderbox in a sense, and it's important to impact on people's aspirations and hopes. The government has started doing that, but we must also be able to make sure that we don't leave it too late before we let Hichilema and his friends in government know that we are unhappy with their conduct when they do wrong. People will call you names, but fine. What is important is, can we express ourselves? These are our leaders. If we are unhappy about a particular action, speak. Don't come to PilAto. Don't go to the show. Don't wait for somebody else to come and speak for you. Express your views and let your leaders know that what they are doing is wrong or that you are unhappy. Civil society, the mistake they made in 2011 when the PF won power was that they went back to sleep. They felt the PF was their baby, some of them. I'm seeing a similar attitude in some cases here and there. We must be able to understand that there's no time for criticism. So we should wait until July or August or next year or the year after to start raising concerns. If we note concerns that are very, very worrying, tendencies that are worrying or governance slippages, let us highlight them. HH and his friends in power may not like them, but we are not there to say things that people like. The way you, PilAto, speak out on this issue, there are many people who criticize you. But what is important is remaining consistent. Sometimes when we have a party like the UPND that everybody is very not everybody. Many Zambians are happy to support and say we have secured the change we need. In fact, the real work starts now. in terms of holding the party in power to account, promoting accountability, but also ensuring that we protect the rights, even of those people who were our tormentors yesterday in terms of human rights violations. Kampyongo, Ruwinda, and Lusambo and his friends, when their rights are violated by the current government, we should speak out. That doesn't mean that we condone what the PF did. If I had a way, in my view, given the damage that the PF did to the country, there should be nowhere near an aspiring Parther seeks to come to power again. The destruction that they inflicted on Zambia was so colossal that it will take years to actually rebuild the country. But our democracy is such that it provides room, even for parties like the PF, even for leaders like those in the PF who were there yesterday tormenting many people in civil society, many people who are now in government, and even myself and my colleagues in academia. What is important is, can we all stick to our roles? Can we all do our parts? Let the intellectuals speak out. Don't shut people just because they belong to the PF, just because they belong to the UPND, just because they are airing views that you disagree with. Pay attention, listen, and when you do, if you have something to say that you disagree with, state it and help them see that, in fact, their point of view is weak. Why? Because you are helping them see that there's another consideration, another point that they haven't considered. That's how we all learn and improve. And in the end, we strengthen the power of our democracy if we learn to tolerate each other, if we focus on content-based discussion, if we actually live to learn side by side as one people, as a nation that is united in diversity, and our leaders, particularly those in cabinet, should make sure that they do whatever they can to uphold our desire to reach that status where Zambia becomes a meeting place and a celebration of diversity.
Thank you very much, Dr. SISHUWA. Thank you very much for accepting to be part of this conversation. And thank you very much for everybody that tuned in to watch and listen. And thank you very much for those that participated, commented, and asked questions. Thank you very much. We hope to see you next week on the same platform, same time. And we say good night and Happy New Year. Happy New Year this year. Hello, Happy New Year, Mamont. Good night, comrades.
Thank you so much.